like to introduce the next speaker, who's also virtual, Joanne Green. Jo Green, who's a landholder at Wanganui, New South Wales. Her talk is called Postfire Dilemmas at a Mixed Forest Edge in Wanganui, New South Wales. And Jo is an ecologist living in Wanganui and working in the Tweed and Byron Shires. Thank you, Jo.
Hello everyone. Hope you can hear me. I've just been getting these little messages cropping up that says I've got an unstable internet connection, so I'll hang in there as long as I can. So yeah, so I'm coming to you today from Wanganui, and I'm just going to get my presentation happening for you. The photos on the screen are from my own property. So I'm talking as a botanist and ecologist today, but I'm also talking as a landowner. And on the 13th of November 2019, I got a big shock when I was in the middle of building my house and the Mountain Arty fire decided to creep up into my backyard. So I've learnt a lot. I was more of a rainforest botanist until now, but I've been involved with teen in some burning situations, but now I've learned a lot more, and it's fantastic hearing the presentations today because it's similar situations, and as Teen just said, the different strategies for different intensities of fire. So Wanganui is in northern New South Wales, close to the coast, and it's close to a lot of national parks, that's for sure. In November 2019, there was a lightning strike in the Nightcap National Park near Nimbin, and the fire crept across to Ewan on the 9th of November, and there was an ember attack across Ewanbrook. Now, this is traditionally a rainforest area. In fact, in 2019, they were celebrating 40 years since the protests at Terania to save the rainforests. So it was kind of ironic that we faced this threat at the end of 2019. And it's been a lot of talk about rainforest burning and what happened, but basically in that fire, it crept across through Ewanbrook, up into Upper Wilsons Creek and down into Wanganui, but didn't quite make Goonagari National Park. Our fire was a lot smaller than the fires down south, and my sympathy goes to you guys down there. But my property is very close to the edge of the national park, so it kind of put me in the hot seat. One of the things about this area is that it is traditionally a rainforest area, so seeing rainforest burn was a bit of a shock to the residents, and you know, mass evacuations. New people had moved into the area and there was quite a shock. So fire in this area isn't normal as it would be in other areas. The last fire was probably 50 years ago. This is what the vegetation looked like before 2019. These photos were taken in 2017. And the photo on the right-hand side, you can see a lot of lemandra. I've got an image that'll have a good look at that now because it changes a lot when we see it later on. And on the left-hand side, you can see that there's rainforest starting to creep back into the sclerophyll. So the rainforest was actually starting to win. So the vegetation pre-fire was rainforest on my property at the lowest elevations, a typical zonation as it went up into higher elevations from wet sclerophyll to dry sclerophyll. As it got into the wet sclerophyll, the brush box, bloodwood, tallowood association was the dominant one. But in these photos, you can see that the bangalow palms are well established and they'd started to dominate. And as the bangalow palms established, other rainforest species were coming in as the birds came in to eat the fleshy fruits of other different lily-pillies and so on, and spread the fruiting and spread all these fruiting species through the wet sclerophyll forest. Of course, this is not unusual part of the world. It is a high rainfall area. So post-fire, this is what happened. Fire came down from the top of the hill and crept down into the valleys and burnt all the rainforest understory. The bangalow palms were burnt, and the water vine, the traditional Cissus antarctica was supposed to be the boundary of where a fire will come to, and has been known to stop a fire. The drought before the fires probably meant that the water vine had no water left in it, and when it burned, it went off like bamboo. So that old wives' tale went out the door really quickly. So rainforest boundaries didn't matter so much anymore. The sad thing was the loss of habitat, the loss of the really big trees, the old brush box. And these trees were the hollows, of course, for the black cockatoo and for the other animals that were using them. And it was silence. It was definitely silence. My koalas have gone. I don't know whether they're coming back or not. I do miss them. But some species are starting to come back. So the soil recovery was really interesting. Now, straight after the fires, we started to notice the fungi growing on the ground. And for anyone that hasn't had experience with this before, this was quite a surprise to see all these beautiful pink fungi growing at the base of the trees, and then finding out that this is the first colonizer. This is the soil stabilizer that stops the erosion after the fires. So it's really important for the rehabilitation of the soil after the fire. And this fungi I found as well was fascinating, and I realized that the wallabies had been eating it. And this fungi grows a massive mycelium underneath the ground, which is how it survives the fire. And so it becomes a really important food source. The little wallaby in the bottom is called the red-legged paddymmelon, for those of you who don't know it, and it is quite threatened. So a really important food, the fungi. First resprouters, of course, were the lemandra, and this is that site where that first photo was. I was surprised because, again, we'd had little experience with fire, and to see the lemandras coming up was quite, you know, it was quite surprising. And the lemandras have come back better than ever. Also surprising was to see the brown carajongs coming up straight after the fire. And this is like 2-3 weeks after the fire went through. This is a really hot fire zone near the top of the hill. And this brown carajon grows in wetlands. It's considered a rainforest pioneer plant. And look at it resprouting. It's quite amazing. And also things seeding like brainia and hybertia, just in the days after the fire. Then came the rainforest. So the plum myrtle story is an interesting one. Plum myrtle is typically a rainforest species, and this is showing it resprouting after the fire had gone through, but then being attacked by myrtle rust. So this species is on the edge now. We're not sure if it's going to actually recover. It gets attacked by psyllids as well. So quite an interesting story to watch, whether plum myrtle will be affected by fire and myrtle rust and not appear in this environment anymore. So more coppice growth. The understory is still very bare, but the rainforest trees that were there are starting to coppice. Things like Sinum glandulosum, scentless rosewood, bolwara, and lots of cryptocarias and endiandras, particularly Cryptocaria glaucescens. Some of the Acmena smithis have all coppiced and come back. There was some Schizmeria, some crabapple, they're coming back. And of course, Trochocarpa is a lot tougher than we even realised. So Trochocarpa can stand lots and lots of things, lots and lots of fire. So at this level, so quite heartening really to see the coppice growth, although if you're aiming for a wet sclerophyll, dry sclerophyll situation, to see rainforest germinating and coming back is not always what you want. As well, there was, of course, there's all the new recruits coming in. There's the things that weren't there before the fire. There was hardly any Devesia arborescens that wasn't present before the fire, and very little Zaira smithi. Lobelias, acacia ulicifolia, and some of the other heath plants have all come back more than ever, and there wasn't many of them before the fire. But at the same time, lots of seedling germination of rainforest species red cedar, pencil cedar, brown carajongs, almost growing like weeds. And to see Tom's presentation, I know exactly what they're going through down there, but I think they're aiming for a rainforest down there, so it's not so hard. I'm not sure what we're aiming for here at this point in time. So as you can see in these photos, this is pretty much 12 months after the fires. The rainforest, the brown carajon, the pencil cedars, the tremas, all those things are doing really well as the ferns. Dead palms, dead bangalow palms, of course. But really interesting to see was the survival of the red bottle nut, the Hicksbeechia planetifolia. It's traditionally a vulnerable species, grows on the edge of rainforests, can grow into the sclerophyll. The drought really affected them, but in these photos, they're coming back and they're coming back better than ever. It's great to see it survive. Whether it had been a hotter fire, would it have survived? Probably not. Not many weeds in these photos, one tobacco. I mean, this environment is very resilient. My neighbours didn't have this, on their cattle farm, didn't have the same resilience, and where that was burned, we've got thousands of tobaccos like in the previous presentations. And also a few devil's fig. That's the only weeds that are really coming up here. So 12 months further on, the slide on the left-hand side shows a blue quandong, Eliocarpus grandis, and it's still alive, but the roots have been attacked by fungi, and I think it's not going to make it. The second picture shows a bangalow palm that's dead. There's a lot of dead bangalow palm. And also coppice growth that seems to be dying back. So in this situation, not many seedlings, rainforest plants dying. I think this situation, we're moving more towards a wet sclerophyll forest. Across to the other side, there's a bangalow palm that was still alive and lots of canopy bangalow palms that are still alive. But at the base, they're being attacked by fungus. And so I'm not sure if they're going to survive long term as well. So we'll just have to monitor and see. So the dilemma comes in. What is really a weed in this new post-fire environment? Lots of considerations. During the drought, sandpaper fig, Ficus coronata, was one of the best species for feeding birds. They fruited really heavy during the drought and fed so many animals. They fell to the ground and fed wallabies. So a terrific plant in a drought, but it's a rainforest plant. Do we want a rainforest plant in a sclerophyll environment? Certainly not in dry sclerophyll. Then there's situations where we've got Wilkia eucliana. This is a food plant for the Regent skipper butterfly, and they're seeding and coming back again. So that's a good thing. So it's bringing back threatened species habitat, drought refuge, and food sources. But too many rainforest trees mean that this environment's going to move towards rainforest when perhaps it should be moving towards wet or dry sclerophyll. Then there's the forest oak story. Just at the front of the property, there's a large stand of forest oak, Alocasuarina torulosum. And these trees were affected by the fire quite a lot. When the fire hits forest oak, it seems to burn right down in underneath the root system. It's almost like a peat fire, and it's almost impossible to put out. So we had to dig out the roots to stop them burning. So it was quite amazing to see that. And lots of the forest oak has actually died from the fire. Some of the big trees have recovered, and that's a good thing because they're the main food plant for the glossy black cockatoo, which was possibly going to be listed nationally as endangered this year because of so much loss of habitat. The forest oak is recovering, but at the same time, underneath that canopy, there is just so many rainforest trees coming up that this is where the real dilemma comes in. What are we managing for? Are we managing for threatened species habitat? Do we leave it alone and let it sort itself out? It's got plenty of resilience. There's thousands of pencil cedars that are coming up for the edge. So yeah, a dilemma, more monitoring probably. So that's my dilemma. Should it be rainforest? Should it be wet sclerophyll? Should we do nothing? To burn or not to burn? I'm certainly looking at cultural burning as an option, a little bit of there. But then again, rainforest is a much less fire-prone environment and it's very close to houses and people. Then there's also the consideration of all the threatened species. So yes, lots of things to think about in this situation. Back to you, team.
Amazing, Jo. Thanks so much for that. It's great. It really is splendid to have these first-hand accounts and for people to be taking notes on what's recovering and what isn't under what fire intensities. And Jo also is keeping a list. And yeah, we're hoping in the EMR journal that, in fact, we have already published your story, I think, Jo, with your current list of what has responded and what hasn't. We may have time for one question. Great. Would anybody like to ask Jo a question here?
Hi Jo. Enjoyed that. It's really yeah, it's good to see. I mean, obviously such a big natural disaster event, and all the work that's going into that recovery and the monitoring afterward. And you mentioned the cultural burning at the end. I was just wondering if there's is there much sort of traditional knowledge resources around that area that you can draw upon for something like this? Like, for example, could you get somebody to come and have a look and give you some sort of assessment from a traditional knowledge point of view?
Yes, actually, it's a great question. That's my next thing. We're very lucky in this area that we've got the Fire Sticks program. And Ollie, who no doubt most people have heard on different programs with the Nature Conservation Council and so on and so forth, the climate change programs. Ollie's doing a lot of work. Fire Sticks is working in this area with a lot of landowners, and I'm hoping that we can do something here as well because of the different communities that are on this property, the different plant communities. It's not all just one thing. It's a whole different. We've got to protect rainforests. We've got to protect some areas. Other areas we do want to burn, where we've got koala habitat that we want to protect. So it's pretty important that we look at some sort of burning here, and it's not going to be really hazard reduction. It's going to be more like cultural burning in this situation, I think. I do hear that Fire Sticks have had a very successful GoFundMe campaign. So hopefully there'll be funding for landowners in this area.
That'd be magnificent because there is also a two-way transfer between Western science and traditional ecological knowledge with respect to conducting fires in these scenarios. So funding this process is just going to be a really good investment all round. So thanks very much, Jo.